The 90s were a bridge between the analog world of the 80s and the digital revolution of the 2000s. Cultural icons like Kurt Cobain, Tupac Shakur, the Notorious B.I.G., Johnny Depp, Leonardo DiCaprio, and David Beckham set the tone for the styles that guys emulated. This was the decade of flannel shirts, baggy jeans, Timberland and Doc Martens, graphic tees, and chain wallets. Now, in the world of watches, there was one model that would go on to own the decade in terms of sales, outselling brands like Rolex to a magnitude of 100 to 1. The Japanese watch I'm talking about became an instant classic because of its timeless design, simplicity, functionality, durability, all of that in 1990 at the affordable price point of under $10. This watch was not only great value for your money, but went on to become a pop culture icon. We see it in 1992 Wayne's World, Election with Matthew Broderick, Napoleon Dynamite. It was even worn and loved by a young lawyer out of Chicago who would go on to become the 44th president of the United States, Barack Obama. So the watch I'm talking about today, gentlemen, is none other than the Casio F91W. Easily one of Casio's best-selling and most loved watches of all time. All that being said, the Casio F91W has a dirty secret, an association with terrorism that most watch lovers who own this watch don't even know about. Now, before I go any further, I want to be really clear. I love this watch. I recommend this watch. And in no way has Casio ever approved of their watches being used to hurt anyone. But the reality is this particular watch has been flagged in secret documents, and it has been labeled by certain intelligence officers as the sign of Al-Qaeda. So how did this come about? What's the full story here? Well, before we answer those questions, we need to take a step back and talk about the history of this watch. Now, the F91W was not Casio's first foray into mass-produced, inexpensive, dependable watches. 7 years before the release of this watch, they released in 1982 the F87W. Now, to a non-watch lover, the F87W and the F91W are going to look like the exact same watch. But the F87 apparently had some production issues. Dependability wasn't where Japanese engineers wanted it to be. So in typical Japanese fashion, they took a good watch and they made it friggin' amazing with the F91W in 1989. Let me be clear, when this watch was released, it was cutting edge. Incredibly accurate, it had a timer, it had an alarm. It was 50-meter water resistant, all for the low price of under $10. Within a year, Casio knew they had a hit and they expanded production. By the 1990s and since, it's been predicted that Casio produces 3 million of these watches a year. In fact, this cheap watch became so popular that they ran into an issue of counterfeit watches. And if you ever want to know if you have an actual Casio, all you have to do is hold down the bottom right button here for 3 seconds, and as you can see, the words Casio will appear. Now, because this watch was so popular, Casio came out with a number of variants. Watches like the F91W3 and F91WG9. We also saw the F91WC series that came in neon colors such as orange, blue, green, pink, beige, and yellow. You want the F91 in gold? You got it. And as you can tell on my wrist, I wanted one in silver, so years ago, I grabbed the Casio A159W. Other interesting features of the watch include a really long battery life. And some guys report this battery lasting for over a decade. Now, the reason for this battery life, it uses a CR216 lithium battery. And the goal here apparently was to create a set it and forget about it watch, one that you could set one time and not worry about for years to come. And when it comes to accuracy, it's a quartz watch. And as most of you guys know, quartz watches oscillate at 32,768 Hertz, which enables them to design the watch so it is incredibly accurate when it comes to timekeeping. And when it comes to durability, you could argue it's no G-Shock, but still, this watch can be dropped, it can be thrown around, and because of its lightweight, simple build, it's very rarely that you hear anyone complaining that this thing was crushed and stopped working. Now, some people complain about the size, but I think that that's a strength. The only complaint really that's valid is that the light is complete crap. And you could argue that that's why Casio released the W59. A little bit bulkier, a little bit better built, and definitely with a better light, the Casio W59 is an improved version of the F91. However, for that improvement, you're going to pay at least 2 to sometimes 3 times the price of an F91W. So with all that being said, you can see why the Casio F91W is loved by the watch community and has become a cultural icon, worn by presidents, worn by the average Joe on the street. Now, really quick, gents, if you are a watch lover like me, you like talking about timepieces, you like learning more about watch history, you'd like the opportunity to win free watches from my collection, gents, if that's you, you need to join our free community, Watch Lover. This community has over 1,000 members, guys just like you, talking about watches and sharing their knowledge. So if you've got something to teach, or if you just want to go through our free courses, gents, use the link in the description of today's video, go over to school and join our free community today. So with all that being said, how did this watch then become the preferred watch of terrorism. Well, let me take you back to 1999. I was stationed in Pensacola, Florida. I was a young Marine Corps lieutenant going through flight school, but as anyone that's ever gone through a pipeline like that, you have wait periods, and I was actually working at the Naval Education and Training Center. It was pretty cool. I was working for an admiral and a captain, and we had a lot of interesting correspondence coming our way. Well, I remember in December of that year, there was a guy caught on the border between the US and Canada trying to smuggle in some explosives, which he apparently was going to take to the LA airport and explode. Now, I remember this distinctly because all the guys I were around, they were aviators, and they were talking about airports and security at the time. The belief was if he had gotten through, this could have been really, really bad. The guy ended up getting the nickname the Millennial Bomber, but if you look deeper into this, what you will see is when you look at those triggers that he was going to use, they were composed of Casio F91Ws and 9-volt batteries. Now, I'm not an electrician, but my brother, he was IED in the Army for over 20 years, and I talked to him about this, and he explained, the speaker on a small little device like this, they can take the wires, and with a tiny charge, whenever that alarm goes off, whenever a timer goes off, a small electronic timekeeping device like this could easily set off an explosive. And this isn't theoretical. In fact, one of the first cases of the F91W being used in an explosive, we go back to 1994. Apparently, an Al-Qaeda bomb maker used an F91W's timer device, 4 hours to be exact, to set up a delayed detonation of an explosive underneath a seat on Philippines Airlines Flight 434. Now, thankfully, this explosive did not bring down the aircraft, but it did unfortunately kill a Japanese tourist. Now, fast forward to 2011, we see secret files out of Guantanamo Bay that are leaked. Of all things to find in these secret files, we apparently see multiple mentions of the Casio F91W. And in fact, we find this particular quote right here. "It is cheap, basic, and widely available around the world. Yet the Casio F91W digital watch was declared to be the sign of Al-Qaeda and a contributing factor to continued detention of prisoners by the analysis stationed at Guantanamo Bay." And apparently these guys weren't the only ones using the F91W as a tell sign of perhaps somebody's involvement with bomb making. No, I was just reading a great article over at Watches of Espionage, and he's talking about while out in the field in a war zone, they're going through the pocket litter, which if any of you guys have backgrounds in law enforcement, you know this is basically the stuff that people have in their pockets when you pick them up. Well, with one particular case, he remembers the guy had a couple F91Ws. He didn't think much of it until one of the CIA officers with him mentioned that it was a common watch used by bomb makers as a detonation timer. So all this begs the question, why use the Casio F91? What's so special about this watch that makes it the go-to watch for people that want a detonation device? Well, it turns out those characteristics also make it perfect for those that are looking for what is known as dual-use technology. So in national security circles, anything that's a DUT, this is a product that was manufactured for a legitimate civilian use. However, it can also be used in military and paramilitary situations. Other examples would be night vision tech, thermal imaging, GPS satellites, drones, aluminum pipes, and ball bearings. Even certain fertilizers. When you look at the Oklahoma City bombing, that was a truck just full of fertilizer that was set off. Now, simply put, there were 5 reasons F91W was used. First up, low cost. I talked to my brother about this in detail, and he explained that, it really just comes down to when they looked at local bomb making, people wanted to keep costs at a minimum. In fact, the most interesting bomb makers are those that actually do everything themselves. As some of you guys may remember, the Unabomber, he was famous for this. The guy actually made his own springs. No, he didn't go into town and buy these things and possibly raise a red flag. This guy did everything right in his cabinet, including bending the metal for a spring. As we talked about earlier, the F91W was one of the cheapest watches out there. And if you were to grab one of the counterfeits, which are sometimes half the price, and yes, were used, you could buy these things in bulk and hand out at a bomb training class, which apparently they were. Next up, we've got accuracy. As I talked about, this is a quartz watch, incredibly accurate. Now, when it comes to setting off IEDs and explosives, oftentimes you're going to see RC, which is basically remote controlled, or they're going to have a wire right to it. But in the cases they would actually want something that would be fully remote, you want to be relying on quartz technology that is not going to let you down. Next up, let's talk about that battery life. Like we talked about, 7 years or more, and right with that, the circuit board. It was really easy to understand. You could open up the back of this watch, you could make minor adjustments, and this thing would just keep going. Right with that, we talked about durability, because you could again argue, well, why not go with a G-Shock? It's going to be more durable. Well, this thing is very durable for about 1/10 to 1/5 the cost of a G-Shock. And finally, let's talk about widespread availability. If you're in Afghanistan, if you're in Nigeria, if you're over in Canada, down in Mexico, in the United States, you can find this watch. Because let's address the question I know I was thinking after I did all this research here, and that is, are people still looking at this watch, especially like TSA or any other type of security personnel? Are they looking at this watch as a potential flag or a threat? And to be honest, gents, I do not know. If you do know, I'd love to hear from you down in the comments. Just keep it anonymous. But seriously, if they are, then it's a stupid one in my opinion. Again, because it really depends about the context, the situation, because the reality is there are so many of these watches out there that to think this watch alone indicates anything, in my opinion, is a bit of a stretch. So what does all this mean? Well, let's look at this picture here of OBL. Do we actually think that he's going to use this watch in a bomb-making device? No. Of course not. One of the reasons that he probably wore the watch, like most people, is he just wanted to be able to accurately tell the time. I know for most men of the Islamic faith, it's nice to have a timer whenever you want to pray to Mecca. And for those of us that just appreciate the convenience of being able to look at your wrist and instantly know the date, time, or if you need a timer or alarm, yeah, to have it all right there. The reality of the 3 million of these sold every single year, almost all of them were going to be used just simply as timekeeping devices. And in fact, the idea that people were being flagged for these, I really think needs to be taken in context with the situation. Think about it like with drugs. If a police officer goes through somebody's pockets and they just have a small pouch of marijuana, what do you think? Recreational use, right? If they have 100 small pouches, what do you think? Now this person's probably selling it. For me, it's the same thing with this. If somebody's just wearing it, a timekeeping device. If you've got 10 of these without the straps in a bag, along with other bomb-making materials, yeah, then there's an indicator that something's wrong. So gents, if you enjoyed this video, check out this one. Why were the Nazis so stylish? I had a lot of fun with this video, made it a while back, and it is, it's freaking amazing. Awesome video. Go check it out. I think you're going to love it. Oh yeah, right there. Why weren't they? Hugo Boss. More than that though. I'll talk about it there. Yeah, check it out.